If you are a Formula One fan since the late 90s or early 2000s, Minardi is a somewhat familiar name for you. But young kids have little idea about this Minardi team as it is a thing that belongs to the history books. If I say that Minardi is still in Formula One, can you believe it? Yes, the team is still competing in Formula One Championship, but as the AlphaTauri F1 team. AlphaTauri F1 team was formerly known as Toro Rosso F1 team before rebranding, and its name is given by the Red Bull owners after acquiring the ownership of this Italian racing team. So today, we are going to explore this former Formula One team in detail. Stay with us till the end to have a great journey through one of the forgotten memories of the Formula One Championship, the origin of Minardi Racing. Let's talk in detail about the origin of this Formula One team, which competed for around 2 decades. Minardi was an Italian racing team which was founded in 1979 by Giancarlo Minardi in the Italian city called Faenza, but their first entry happened in 1985 at the Brazilian Grand Prix. The Minardi family has a 3-generation-long involvement in the racing industry before the establishment of the Formula One team in 1979. Giancarlo's grandfather had a Fiat dealership in Faenza since 1927. And his son and father of Giancarlo, Giovanni Minardi, competed in racing events since 1940. With the influence of his father, young Giancarlo had the idea of creating his own Formula One team. The Minardi team has a long racing history with Giovanni before making it into F1. The first ever Minardi car, which was used to compete in racing events by the name of GM75, was fully built by the team owner Giovanni Minardi. Other than using cars from renowned manufacturers, they tried to build their own engines. So they used 6-cylinder engines designed by Oberdan Golfieri, and it was built by the engineer Antonio Lotti. After the death of his father, Giancarlo took the control of the racing part of their family business and improved it to a level where it can compete even in Formula One championships. First, he bought a racing team called Scuderia del Passatore in the early 1970s. To push the limits in the racing world with more facilities. His first attempt was in the Formula Italia category, which is similar to the present-day Formula 3, and Minardi team competed in that category using Brabham BT28 chassis and Alfa Romeo engines. In the 1972 edition of Formula Italia, the Minardi team finished runner-up with Giancarlo Martini, and they turned that success into a championship the next year. With some ups and downs, Minardi always appeared as a top contender in the Formula Italia Championship, and that success led to opening their doors into Formula 2. Minardi team received financial backing from Italian motor racing patron Piero Mancini, and they established their team as a constructor in Formula 2 Championship. They used a BMW-powered car which was designed by Giacomo Carlieri, and their first driver was Miguel Angel Guerra. They had little success in their first season by completing as 9th in the standings. Then they designed their own car for the next season, which was branded as Minardi M281. Several drivers were observed to compete for the Formula 2 Championship for the Minardi team. Their driver lineup was expanded up to 7 drivers during the 1983 championship, including Alessandro Nannini, but none of them enjoyed much success. 1984 season is recorded as Minardi's final F2 season as they decided to upgrade into the supreme category of the single-seater racing. Their decision to enter into the 1985 Formula One Championship was taken, keeping enough time to design their Formula One car. Their first ever Formula One car was branded as M184, and it was designed for dual-purpose usage in both Formula One and in Formula 3000. Which was introduced to replace the Formula 2 Championship. Carlieri designed the car for Minardi, and it was powered by the Alfa Romeo's V8 engines. But it was just a prototype before their official entry into the sport, and they were scheduled to compete in the 1985 championship with M185 powered by Alfa Romeo V6 engines. But at the final moment, they decided to give up on the Alfa Romeo deal as Alfa Romeo chief designer Carlo Citti agreed to provide his own engines after forming his own company called Motori Moderni. Unfortunately, the engine was not ready on time, so Minardi had to use Cosworth engines for the first 2 races until the engines were ready. However, their first season was completely a disaster, as the Motori Moderni engine was never powerful enough to withstand the challenge from their rivals. Minardi competed as a single-car team in the 1985 championship, and Pierluigi Martini was their first driver. His best finish was 8th in the Australian Grand Prix. Even though their first campaign was not as successful as they planned, The determination of the Minardi owner was very high to expand their team into a two-car team in the following season. As Motori Moderni engines were unable to yield much success in the next 2 seasons as well, Minardi finally decided to switch into Cosworth engines. But any of these modifications were unable to change their position as a midfield team. Giancarlo Minardi was the sole owner of the team during the period between 1985 to 1995. Due to the lack of sufficient funds to run the team, Giancarlo sold some stakes in the team to Flavio Briatore, but his involvement with the team ended up in 1977 after 2 seasons. Then Gabriel Rumi joined the team as a new investor and continued their partnership till the end of the 2000 season. Australian businessman Paul Stoddart acquired the ownership of the team from the Minardi family, as Giancarlo did not have enough funds to run the team. But he continued the racing operations under the Minardi brand till the end of the 2005 season. In Minardi's 2-decade-long history, they were unable to produce any impactful results which can attract sponsors at more competitive prices. Ownership transfer to Red Bull. Due to the lack of funding, Paul Stoddart decided to sell the team if he could find the right buyer to hand over the team's future. So, nearly 41 parties had made contact with Stoddart to acquire the ownership of the team, and his criterion to move the team forward safely and to keep the operational base in Faenza was fulfilled only by a few teams. So among them, Red Bull GmbH, who had already acquired the ownership of the Jaguar F1 team as well, showed a huge interest to buy Minardi F1. They saw this as an opportunity to give more exposure to the young Red Bull drivers before directly promoting them to the senior F1 team. After holding several rounds of discussion, Red Bull agreed to buy the team in 2005. Then they rebranded the team as Toro Rosso and run it as the sister team in parallel with the operations of the senior team. Even though the Red Bull senior team is based in Milton Keynes, Toro Rosso's operations are still handled from their former base in Italy. Toro Rosso showed stronger improvements with Red Bull funding, and they even recorded some victories and podiums as well. Sebastian Vettel, Max Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, and Daniel Ricciardo are some proud products of this Toro Rosso team. But at the end of the 2019 season, Red Bull wanted to rebrand the Toro Rosso as AlphaTauri to promote their clothing brand. So, the Minardi origin of the team is rarely discussed, as this ownership transfer happened more than 16 years ago. Who were the famous drivers in the Minardi driver lineup? The most famous names on the Minardi driver list are Fernando Alonso, Mark Webber, and Jos Verstappen. Even though they were unable to record victories with the Minardi team, they had some short episodes with this Italian racing team in their decades-long racing careers. 2-time world champion Fernando Alonso drove for Minardi in his debut season of 2001 and signed immediately with Renault as their reserve driver. Australian driver Webber made his debut with Minardi in 2002 with a spectacular 5th-place finish in his first Grand Prix in Australia and moved to Jaguar after spending 1 season with them. Father of Max Verstappen, Jos, spent a disappointing season with Minardi in 2003, as the car was an underperforming one as usual. In addition to these 3 well-known personals, Pierluigi Martini, Marc Genet, Luca Badoer, Christian Fittipaldi, Michele Alboreto, Justin Wilson, Giancarlo Fischiella, and Jarno Trulli are some other interesting names that can be found on this Minardi driver lineups. Post-Formula One episode of Minardi. After giving up on Formula One, both Giancarlo Minardi and Paul Stoddart used the Minardi brand in racing. Giancarlo Minardi reacquired certain rights to use the Minardi brand and established a team to compete in the Junior Euro Formula 3000 series in 2006. It was named as Minardi Team by GP Racing at the beginning and merged with GP2 Team PK Sport to form Minardi PK Sport in 2007. But from 2008, it is simply known as PK Sport. Paul Stoddart attempted again to join F1 for the 2008 championship by the name of European Minardi F1 Team Limited, but this proposal was rejected by FIA. So he turned his head towards the US-based Champ Car Series, and it also ended without much success as the series was folded in 2008. But he still has the rights to use the Minardi brand. In that way, a 2-decade-long Minardi story ended in an unsuccessful way. It is difficult to predict that it will make a comeback into the sport in the future as more automobile companies and multinational companies held ownership of the majority of F1 teams, other than individual ownerships. However, Minardi's fame is far beyond their real performances relative to the other midfield teams at the same period, as their name can still hear even at present in some F1 commentaries. Share your thoughts about the Minardi F1 team in the comments section below. Thank you for watching the video.